All right, music fans, welcome back. Harmless Dave here, talking about real music in real time for real people just like you and just like me. When one talks about Steve Perry, and I do that quite often because there are people here because of that, um, you have to come to the conclusion that maybe Steve Perry valued friendship more than he valued music. He went years without really doing anything musically. He said he lost his passion for music, even though I dispute Steve's timeline, and it's easy really to kind of deconstruct that because I think Steve Perry was still very active from the early 90s to when Journey decided to part ways with him. And I think sporadically he was active probably a few years after that. But for the most part, he went into a pretty secluded place as far as being involved with the music industry. I think he was probably thinking of song ideas. Probably, I've been told he was creating things and just putting them aside. You know, he had no intention of releasing these songs until later on, until his relationship with Kelly and so forth. But Steve Perry wanted relationships. He wanted people he could depend on because there were a series of things that happened to the guy throughout his life where in his childhood he says things happened which really scary. He didn't really come out with that information. And what's weird is nobody in Journey ever reacted to his interview when he went on with Dan Rather and talked about essentially child abuse. That's what it sounded like. And it appears that it was, you know, a sexual in nature, which must have been really hard for Steve Perry to talk about and certainly opened the door for a lot of other questions. But obviously the fact that Steve Perry willingly came out with that information explained a lot, and also in my eyes gives Steve Perry a little bit more space between, you know, just his wanting to kind of be away from people. Because when that happens to you at a young age, your trust level drops dramatically where you just don't trust anybody. So I think that factored in seriously to all his other relationships, whether it be with women or with his bandmates. I think he wanted to open up to these guys, but these guys were just rock stars. They were just trying to climb the ladder of the rock business. He was managed by a guy who was kind of cutthroat, good at what he did, and certainly made a lot of great moves, but that wasn't Steve Perry's motivation. Steve Perry joins this group and even says, hey, I still feel like an outsider. And they're like, what? Because their definition and his definition are different. I mean, he's looking for real friendship, camaraderie, and they're looking for a guy just to hang out with and be friendly with and maybe have a few good times with, but it's a different vibe. Perry was looking for something that they weren't providing. And you can see that over and over again. Perry can't deny how great he was with Journey and how Journey helped inspire him to be a better songwriter, probably a better performer, and so forth. Also put tons of pressure on him, and it was basically how much we can get out of this guy. And even Jonathan Cain said in his book that they probably, you know, pushed that thoroughbred horse too hard. And so Perry, I think, if there was a solid foundation within the friendship aspects here, in other words, if he got along with Cain, Sean, and the rest of this band in a way that was more sincere, and, you know, we were brothers, musical brothers, and we went through things together, and those relationships were so strong that it didn't matter. If Perry wanted to quit, those guys wouldn't have said, why? You know, what's wrong with you? Because that's kind of what happened. And they were too busy questioning what was wrong with Perry rather than trying to find out if Perry was okay and what they could do. Because nobody ever talks about that in any of the interviews. They never say, we were really concerned about Steve. We love Steve, and Steve was very important to us. But that wasn't really what they said. And when you think about that, Perry, when he did that interview where he said, these guys just want to work with me. They don't really like me. They don't care about me. They just want to work with me. Now, Neil Schon has refuted that and said, no, I just want to hang out and have a cup of coffee, which might be true. But is there a relationship there that is sincere and real? Like, Neil loves his wife and talks about his wife all the time. And I believe that there's a real sincere relationship there. These guys don't miss Steve Perry in the sense that we miss our buddy. They're not out there saying, gee, we had a lot of great times together. Steve was this awesome guy. Maybe Steve Perry isn't an awesome guy. Maybe that's part of the problem with them. I don't know. But, maybe if these guys had a better relationship with Steve Perry, none of this stuff would have happened, because they would have said, okay, we've achieved everything we need to achieve as a rock band, especially when you're going into the 2000s. In the late 90s, the music industry was already dying. You had songs sitting on adult contemporary charts for like 50 weeks because there was a lack of creativity, number one. And number two, the format had been destroyed by the music that came prior to it. And all the music got dumbed down. So Journey comes back with this great album called Trial by Fire. And they have a song that gets nominated for a Grammy, and deservedly so, because it's, probably one of the better things on the radio in 1996. And creatively speaking, everybody was working very hard to create great music. But I don't think people really worked all that hard to create great relationships. So Perry has this problem. And again, you could speculate. The speculation on the problem, on the hip injury and all that, is very interesting. And you could do video after video about it. And I've done a lot of videos on this topic. Steve, are you going to be okay? That's the most important thing. We want you to be okay. We can put this thing on hold as long as it takes, because at that point they're showing, hey, our relationship with Steve Perry is more important than if we go on without Steve Perry. So they hire Steve Augeri, and Perry at that point is thinking to himself, wow, these guys care more about just making money than hanging out with me, and wondering if I'm going to be okay. That's why Perry came back with, hip surgery is not a band decision. It's a personal decision. And he's correct. He was 100% right. How long would these guys have waited for Steve Perry? I don't know. Maybe Steve Perry wanted them to prove to him that he was more important than them just going out on tour. That's, and that's a theory. I think that's a pretty good theory. And I think Perry was looking for authenticity in these relationships. That's why he fell so hard for Kelly. Because again, Kelly was real. And Kelly, if anybody could influence Steve Perry, it was Kelly. Say, hey, Steve, don't do this again. In other words, don't go into seclusion. And I'm thinking that maybe Perry honored her wishes, but he still isn't fully healed from all these things he went through. And he's accomplished everything he needs to accomplish. He can't top, the early days of Journey or, like his first solo album. Those things are just at a really high bar. And no matter how many great songs you write today, you don't have the support system for those songs. We saw that with Traces. And I'm thinking at Steve Perry, this should be everywhere. And yeah, it was on the radio a little bit. And radio stations would do these interviews with Perry. And they would talk about Journey. And they talk about all these things. And, oh, yeah, Steve Perry has a new album out. And we're not going to play it on this radio station, but Steve Perry has a brand new album out. And this is where things are today. So Perry he makes this music for his hardcore fans and more or less for himself. And if you like it, great. If you don't, He's not worried about it. He's Steve Perry. He's accomplished everything he needs to accomplish. But I think, honestly, Steve Perry may have valued friendship over music, especially when it came to being in a band with, you know, people you're on the road with constantly and you're hanging out with and you're eating. And, you know, in the old days, Journey used to drive in a station wagon and so forth. And I think they graduated to a bus eventually. And then, strangely enough, Steve Perry decided to charter his own bus during the 80s, and that was a big controversy. He wanted to be secluded from those guys. Maybe he didn't like their lifestyle choices. Maybe he wasn't bonding. And in order to sustain a working relationship, he decided to kind of go off and do his own thing. He had a girlfriend for a while, and that may have played a factor in it, where the girlfriend didn't want him just hanging out with the guys that were going to be into the nightly rock star debauchery, which, if you read any book about a rock band, you're going to find out crazy things that happen behind the scenes. Ted Templeman talks about it in his book, and other books obviously out there. Don Felder, which I just got through reading most of the Heaven and Hell book. The temptations and the lifestyle choices and things that these guys were making, it just wasn't good for, you know, meaningful long-term relationships with people that you were in a band with. I mean, maybe if you're all seriously into hardcore debauchery together and you can, you know, you could celebrate those things and do those things together, and that creates a strong bond. I don't know. I don't think it's the kind of bond Steve Perry was looking for. And I think that's why eventually he started to distance himself. Very similar to Peter Cetera, what happened with him in Chicago. And I'll probably cover that in a separate video, because I think that's almost as interesting. So in any event, figured I'd put that out there just so people would kind of maybe analyze that. People always wonder why won't Steve Perry get back with these guys? What's going on? And it's not about the music. It's about relationships. Because Neil Schon has tried a million times, and sometimes I get frustrated and I'm thinking, Steve, it's a lot of water under the bridge. But again, you look at Tommy Shaw, he won't hang out with Dennis DeYoung, and he says, I just want to be happy. And that bothers me, but maybe there's something else that I don't know. Maybe, again, I've challenged Styx to put out the correct narrative as to what's going on, and they just make up stuff. They just keep coming up with new stuff as to what the reason is why they can't just do one more tour or just do some music with Dennis DeYoung. But again, these things are really complicated, and I'm not privy to everything. But with Steve Perry, it's pretty clear that he wanted more of a relationship with these people than they were capable of doing. So that's my take on it anyway. So there you have it, folks. Psychoanalysis. Remember when I did that a long time ago? I got in a lot of trouble. But it's, you know, you could disregard this as just the ramblings of a crazy man, because that's what a lot of people do with me. But I do think there's some truth to it. So take it for what it's worth. All right. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I'm always looking for new subscribers, and make sure you hit the bell if you want notifications on new videos, and watch the videos all the way through, including the commercials. It's really important. I know ads are annoying, but I get revenue from those ads. And if you're so inclined to do it, Patreon, for just $1 a month, you can do more if you'd like. But $1 gets you into Patreon and daily conversations, and I've been having a ton of conversations. Plus, I post music up there, things you haven't heard on the radio for a billion years, and random thoughts that go through my mind, and then I put them into words, and I post things. So you can check those out. But again, thanks for the support, and I'll see you soon.